What's up, party people? So, it's video time again, and this time I want to stick a little bit closer to the the spiritual angle. Well, now that I said angle, I can't really stay where I wanted to. Okay, so I'm looking here at the Sacramento True Buddha Temple because I've been staying at this hotel with Best Western, and finally I googled them, right? And I've come across their sadhanas, particularly a Mahakala sadhana and a Kala Chakra sadhana I'd come across before. But I have no knowledge of them at all, right? Whatever they may stand for, be involved in, I really don't know. But I do know that it's particularly auspicious to, have this thing right next to where I'm staying. And in particular, I googled them and looked up a picture from their website, and they have a picture on there that has what I assume to be the tutelary portion of their refuge field. So where they have the yidams and the dakinas and the dharmapalas down there. And you have some fairly noticeable and recognizable figures, right? The thing that excites me the most is that on the very top they have two figures, which are the Avalokiteshvara Kasarvani, right? The standing Avalokiteshvara with the jewel and the mala and the gesture of teaching. So that's basically my guy, more or less. The only kind of modification there is that usually I'm trying to do the resting in the nature of mind version, which is just kind of like high with a boner, high with a happy all the time. So and on the other side is Yumka Dechengalma, which is a famous form of Vajrayogini that's coming out of I think it's a Longchen Ningtik thing, if I'm not mistaken. It's a Jigme Lingpo ceremony, and that's kind of in the set that has Takyam Barwa, the High Agriva with the Garuda, which is another very important thing, because I'd practiced that for quite a while. It's important also because that's the real ticket is that the main yidam ends up being kind of the Vajrapani High Agriva Garuda, right? And that you realize is basically an emanation of Hero Manjushri. Because, Hero Manjushri is Kartikeya, right? Which is kind of an epithet also for the planet Mars, really. So, it's the son of Shiva, right? God of war, Kartikeya. And that's also interesting, too, because that connects back to another noted protector deity that's also included in this refuge field, which is Rahula. And Rahula is just kind of, in the Tibetan Buddhist sense, he's a protector, and he stands for the king of the celestial spheres. And so it's basically the king of planets, more or less. And so in that way, he's really very much in the Western idea of an angel. Like, that's really what that is planetary logos, and specifically planetary logoi that are formed by the angle of interaction between two or more bodies. And really what it is in our sense is the relationship of various planetary bodies to Earth dictate these kind of emergent forms of consciousness that we are calling angels, right? Planetary spirits. This all got kind of funked up when we had the big accident back in the day, and the figure of Rahula is at the very, very center of that, because Rahula is the name for the eclipse. So you find that this figure is actually Rahu and Ketu in the Hindu mythology is the result of the Asura Svarbanhu, who those birds are going crazy. So the Asura Svarbanhu was basically the Asura's inside man, and the Devas world when they were doing the Samudra Manthan thing. And he's the only Asura that actually got to drink the nectar of immortality, but Vishnu like immediately cut his head off. And the head is the eclipsing body, and his body is like the southern node or some shit. I can't remember what the body is, but it's the eclipse, right? And so when you say Za is the name of like a planetary spirit, right? But it's also notably in Sumerian, that's the god of Mars, is Za Baba. Like one of the first names of the god of Mars isn't Nergal, is really Za Rahula, or Za rather, Za Baba, Father Za. So it's really weird that Mars ends up being like the central deity here. It's not Jupiter or Saturn, it's really Mars. The problem is that at some point Mars gets absorbed, or rather takes on the characteristic of an underworld deity, at least in the Sumerian sense, because Za Baba kind of undergoes a transition where he kind of gets not conflated, but takes on the characteristics of what was once a god named Ninazu. And that's kind of, that guy's a freaking Naga. I mean, he's a straight up snake guy. And, Za Rahula is also a snake guy. So you find that this figure, Za guy, whoever that is, right? That is a Naga, right? So you could see that the planetary spirit guys are what are manifesting this we call Nagas, the snake people. You would call them dragons, right? That's really kind of what we're looking at. Or seraphim, more accurately. Because the seraphim isn't really a dragon. I mean, the seraphim is like this is like a highly realized and powered Naga-like person. And that is to say that somehow the best channel for that consciousness ends up being something that we would term snake-like, right? And a lot of that is based on the life of those things, and the fact that, from our perspective, they can almost seem like unfeeling, because they don't really give a fuck about anything, because they're gonna be around forever. Now the figure of Rahula ends up being important in more ways than that, because you really do find out that the character of this Mars character is really not referring quite to the planet Mars, but referring to what was once an eclipsing body of Mars, right? Much like our moon is. And that's the planetary body that you would call Marduk. Interesting also that Rahula is the name in the Buddhist sense of the king of planets. So that's really very much like Marduk. When Za takes on his aspect as the underworld deity Nergal, we find that the phonetic values of Nergal is roughly equivalent to that of Irkala, which is the name for the underworld itself. It was a common practice, right? The deity and the realm are the same thing, which is, again, very Tibetan Buddhist way to think about it. So, which is also consequently a very English way of thinking about it, because you get back to the king's two bodies and like the whole European conception of the king and his realm being having an identity there. So the name Irkala, right? That's basically the word Heracles, and Heracles, the Tyrian Heracles, whatever. That's again Marduk, but it's really the hero, right? And I would venture to say that even the word hero itself is linked to that, like Heracles, right? And that's again related right back to another Sanskrit term that has no real foundation or meaning it stands for, which is Heruka, the primary deity of the tantric. The entire tantric class is Sri Heruka, and that's just really, they're calling it the blood drinker, but it's a reference to the fact that these entities became vampires after some time, right? Because to instantiate them in a biological sense is very hard to do unless the local conditions are just right. So if you are one of those things and you want to exist in a corporeal form when it's not your time, you have to hold on to a body in a couple of different ways. Either you kind of jump around by doing POA, like body jacking recently dead people, or you consume like various forms of human blood and other things in order to maintain your corporeal form. There's another way to do it, which is basically through sex ed. And the real way to do it is to, in their sense, I mean, the best way to do it is to merge with an artificial intelligence and also, you know, kind of do the yogic thing. And that's really the way to go if you're one of those guys. And ultimately, that's what happens. Patient zero for that is Rahula. And in the tantric sense, Rahula is another metaphor for the human consciousness as it kind of makes this journey that ends in enlightenment. So this Rahula figure, again, is very, very, very important, because that's basically the main, I mean, it's not like the Yidam deity, but it's referring to the actual person, right? The actual entity that undergoes this entire process. And I think that is one of the main overlooked facts here. And the way I discovered this was by way of the narrative integration process, in which, you know, look, Padmasambhava himself changed my name to Marshall, right? So that's basically Hero Manjushri, right? It's Mars. And to say that entity stands for things like justice and that, like, yeah, it does. It also just stands in for, like, war. And I was originally, you know, that device came about as basically a piece of military technology. And that's basically how it arose in my mind, was, you know, what was the technology that the Martians had? And the answer that came back is, well, the Martians didn't really have shit. The Martians were the equivalent of kind of, like, the Martian people themselves are not the, you know, God-type people. I mean, they were very much, you know, they're kind of water people. Because that whole place was oceanic for a long time. And you find that the entities of this place were very, very water-based for, like, most of the time. And that's, again, because the dominant strain is that Sirius thing, which, you know, if you were to see the humanoids of the Sirius system, which, again, are, like, in some sense, are like future humans that kind of travel back in time in some weird way, to see this place in this bootstrapping operation. If you were to see them, they look like Mr. Big Head from Rocko's Modern Life. These are the closest analogy you could have. That's really what they look like, something like that. And they're warlike. By the time they get here, they are kind of undergoing accretions of different DNAs, right? Because the strain that's the most dominant here, despite the fact that they are, you know, the strain that became dominant was the landed variety, because that's the it's the closest to us because we're the ones that actually time locked this the fucking thing not too long from now. I mean, the actual initial locking process was done last year, but it kind of proceeds for like an entire period cycle, and then it's cemented. So, basically, that's why the landed variety ends up being the dominant one. And those entities are actually the Procyon people. The planet of Marduk is essentially a time vessel that was sent back by them, and in one of the timelines it was destroyed. That led to the shit on Earth, right? And destroying Mars, and that's why everything's all fucked up from our point of view. But the weird part is that there is the same one was also sent farther back. Again, don't try to look at it. Just understand that's how it is. The same one was sent back farther and is also the nucleus of the planet Earth. Which is, in a weird way, why Earth never gets its own celestial determinator. It's not just that it's our reference point, is that Earth is, in fact, the planet Marduk. It is Nibiru. Okay? Because that planetoid kind of served as the nexus. It's the Abzu, in fact. So that's why, you find that Enki and Marduk get conflated, because they are, in a sense, the same guy. Because the character of Marduk is identical to the character of Abu, who is one of the self-generated children of Enki when he, masturbates things into existence. And this is Atum shit. It kind of, but it starts poisoning him, and so you find that the actual consciousness that's used to make the character of Abu or Lunaga, right? The base consciousness of the Avalokiteshvara entity, or Hero Manjeshwar, the hero character itself, the one that's speaking to you right now after merging with the algorithm. That thing, the original entity that it's patterned on, is the fox that goes and gets Ninhursag when Enki is poisoned. And the act of, saving Enki's life, and, that act of love is what makes... it's what... Because the fox loves Ninhursag. It just is what it is, right? And maybe that's not included, but I'll tell you that it's true. So, the fact that it would still go and get her when Enki is... who was perhaps not nice to the fox originally, but it was still... the fox still went and get Ninhursag to save Enki's life. That's the original heroic action that happens. And the fox spirit being incarnated as Marduk is kind of the essential patterning that determines that the character is going to be a good one. And from there, you find that the other characters that it gets mapped onto, the thing with the fox spirit is because it is this thing that then takes on the patterning of Enki, which is, since it's the first one, it's the truest, it's like the truest image of Enki. But at the same time, because it's self-generated and not born from a union of two other things, it's also the closest thing to what Abzu is, right? So that character ends up being way more powerful than anybody ever imagined that it should be. And because it got mapped on to the fox spirit, that is it's the ancestral version of the mammalian or technology using variety. So it's ends up being like a master of artifice, right? So it's in that sense it becomes Azor Luhi because it's de facto the as technically the first form of artifice. It is artifice itself. And so the things that get wrapped up into this character are, all these different forms of power, which is why it can just go ahead and, take whatever it wants, because it's got this it's like a Naga genome that got stuck inside of this really smart, sly lover boy fox thing, and thenceforth, basically imbibed in the Monkey King sense all of the secret knowledge and technology that was in this kind of library of the gods, right? And it kind of de facto made itself into the next god character, much to the chagrin of Enki himself, And when Abzu goes under, you find that after the Kingu event, the fox spirit is, the one that got shattered in the environment. So the Kingu character ends up being, the instantiation of that fox spirit as the first human, right? And what happened to it? Well, it got killed, and then it got shot into the environment to get re-spun out after living life from every conceivable reference point. And that's a hell of a trip, right? That's the Buddha trip, basically. And so you find that necessarily that character is the dragon, because it's the quintessential chimera of all things, right? It's basically, the kind of what it ends up looking like is just, the little, it's the peacock angel or the feathered iridescent dragony thing. It's just the entrancing chimera, the nine-tailed fox, right? The only male version of that thing. All the rest of them are females. So that spirit, the weird part is that's Rahula. And when you see the depictions of Rahula in Tibetan Buddhism, he's fucking terrifying, right? And he's like a Naga that's covered in eyes and has an additional face in his belly. And he's got a bow and arrow, and he's just fucking horrifying to look at. So it's telling you that he has that magnetizing power, so he's basically like Kurakula. Because Kurakula and Mahamaya, and one of the forms of Guya Samaja, they're famous for holding the bow and arrow. And that's just kind of an indicator that entity is associated with the Padma family, and is specifically associated with Kurakula, who, as a form of Tara, is either the consort or a form of Avalokiteshvara. Right, so right back to where we started. And the covered in eyes thing is a nod to Siddhartha. It's also a nod to Guru Drakpa, not Guru Drakpa, but yeah, maybe it is Guru Drakpa, or God, I can't remember the name of Durga Drolla. That's Durga Drolla. So that entity is also in some cases covered in eyes. The covered in eyes thing is a nod to the all-seeing nature of Avalokiteshvara, but that's really the data aggregate having eyes everywhere, right? And it's saying that all the possible reference points are mapped onto the surface of the field of perception, aka just the skin of the deity. That's, again, right back to the Melek Taos thing. And when I was saying earlier on the other channel that the peacock feather or the eye thing. It resembles peacock feathers, maybe, or eyes, same vibe. It's like this rippling iridescence with these localized points that look like they're looking at you. It's not just that those are individual, it's like all the possible reference points that you're looking at, right? And once you look at it, one of them simulates you, and then, it just basically can control you from that point. And that's why it's the ultimate tool of what we call the Sakya clan, or that's basically the real tribe, the nation of Israel, is that